Hi, everybody. Welcome. Happy to have you all here. We're going to just let people keep entering for a minute. Hi. Glad to have so many of you tonight. So I'm going to start out by doing some introductions while we're letting people join us. I'm Lindsay Yackel. I'm the Education Program Coordinator at the University of Chicago Celiac Disease Center. Any of you who are patients, maybe, in the last couple of years have probably heard my name. I reach out to people pretty regularly. We also have with us Audrey Rowan. She is our pediatric dietitian, and she will be here if we have some questions we want to run by her, anything we need her help with. And then we also have Rachel Lieberman, and she is our director here at the University of Chicago Celiac Disease Center. And she'll be talking to us a little bit more when we get to the panel discussion that we'll be having a little bit later. I'm going to start out with a presentation, short presentation, nothing too long. And then after the presentation, we're going to do a little conversation, a little bit more open, relaxed conversation about college. This presentation is tackling college life. So assuming that we've got some high school kids and their parents or their parents, and we probably even have some college students as well. So yeah, we'll start out. I'm just gonna get everybody flowing a little bit. And if you want to put in the chat, maybe if you're in high school or if you're in college, that would be kind of fun for us to know. Or if you're a parent where your child is in school, just put that right in the chat. While you're putting those things in the chat, I also want to mention, once we get started, if you have questions, we prefer that you use the Q&A. Little link down at the bottom should have a question mark and a Q&A. Put your questions in there, and we'll just keep the chat for these things here at the beginning. So we'll look at this. Let's see. Senior, heading to college next year, parent and senior, same. Parent of student in college, okay. Ninth grade, very prepared you'll be. High school junior and a parent. Heading off to college next fall. So we've got the majority of the people are parents and juniors and seniors, it looks like, for the most part. High school freshmen, we got a couple people that are getting prepared. This is great. Okay, perfect. Good group. 11th grade and 8th grade. The 8th grader is going to learn a lot from the 11th grader as you go through this process. That'll actually be really nice. Okay. And then my next question is, do you already know, those of you who are juniors or seniors, do you already know where you're going to college? Do you have it figured out? Have you been accepted somewhere? Where do you stand on that? You can put those answers in the chat too, if you already know where you're going to college, or if you're already in college, where do you go currently? Colorado from St. Louis. St. Louis University. Undecided still, yeah. Yes, undecided, looking for some help from current college students. That does all make sense. Good, okay. A lot of undecided still, but that's okay. There's time. There's always more time, not a problem. And then the next question, I guess, which fits into some of these responses, have you talked to someone at the school already about accommodations? Those of you who know where you're going, have you already connected with somebody at the school to talk about accommodations and things like that? accommodations counselor sent to dietetics. Waiting on acceptances with the head chef and the dietitian. Very nice. Okay. So we've got some people that are making some of those first steps. That's great. Going on a tour this weekend. Tour guide will know the specifics. On your tour, go to the dining hall. They'll know the specifics. Good. Okay. All right. That's great. Okay. So what I'll do now, thank you for answering those questions. I appreciate it. It's nice to get a sense of where everybody is and for each of you to kind of know where everybody is with things. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to open up my presentation. We're going to cover some of these things that you're concerned about, that you mentioned in those, and we'll see if we can get through some of that and help everybody get some questions answered. All right, give me just a second. Always takes a second for me to get this to work. We're good. Okay. All right. These are the questions that I just was asking. All right. All right. So the first thing we want to talk about is how you will maybe connect with your care team, your clinical team that you already have prior to going to college. So I guess my first question is, and I'll just sort of put it out there and you don't have to actually answer me, but the first question would be, does anyone know how to contact the doctor or the nurse that they work with currently? So any of these kids who are on, I wonder if any of them know how to reach out to their current team. And if not, I'm going to tell you that the majority of your clinical teams have portals. My chart is a really good example. It's what we use here at the University of Chicago. It's what a lot of medical centers, doctors' offices, places like that use. And if they don't use my chart, there's definitely other ones, but my chart's one of the most common ones to find being used. So what you can do in my chart, you get a login, a password, all of those things, you get it set up, and all of your medical records are in there. And it's a place where you can actually send messages to your clinical team, to your gastroenterologist or your dietitian or your psychologist or whoever is part of your team. You can send messages back and forth to them that way. And for example, here at University of Chicago, a message might be sent to Dr. Verma, for example, and oftentimes either Dr. Verma herself will answer the question or her nurse will respond to questions, and the turnaround time is usually very quick. Anyhow, so that's kind of the background behind the scenes without actually going into an office, the way that you can get in touch with your clinical team. If you're using a doctor at school, so when you go to college, you may make the decision to have your doctor at home, but also a doctor at school that it can help you while you're away at school, maintain, your health and keep your celiac disease well controlled and all of those things. It's up to each individual how they want to do that. Some people just continue to maintain their clinical team at home and communicate through my chart and things like that. But other people may decide to do kind of both, have one if they're away at school, and then also have the team at home. So anyhow, if you're going to do a doctor at school, we would suggest that you schedule an appointment far in advance of starting school. A lot of times there's a long wait. It can be 6 months or more that you're on a waiting list. If you call and you say, I'd like to make an appointment, and they say, that's great, we have an opening in July. Not uncommon if you're calling today. So we say, really as far in advance as you can, kind of once you know where you're going to school, finding the doctor in that area would be helpful in calling and making that appointment at that time and scheduling out for a future date. That's the best way to do that. And then if you are doing that, if you're using a doctor at school, then you want to have some records transferred from the current doctor to the new one. And the wording on that is a little bit probably not the best wording. You don't necessarily have to give up your doctor's at home, this would be, you might want to transfer some records from your current doctor to your additional doctor at school, that kind of a thing. And again, it's totally up to individuals whether they want to have a doctor at the school area as well. If you're going to continue to use your current doctor, you want to go ahead and schedule appointments during your breaks, holiday breaks, summer breaks, things like that. So you want to start to think about when your latest appointment was and how do we make sure that the follow-up appointment maybe ends up in December, and then an appointment after that maybe is in summer, or however often you have your follow-up appointments. But you want to kind of think about that and make sure you get in that schedule for during those breaks. Okay. And then as far as a college prep appointment with your clinical team, we really suggest that you reach out to the clinical team, your gastroenterologist or your family doctor, whoever it is that monitors your celiac disease diagnosis. We suggest that you schedule an appointment with them prior to going to college so that you can have a conversation with them about anything that they want you to know or think would be helpful for you to know before you head off to school. And this is where we maybe consider the possibility of the child, young adult, and whether they want to do this appointment on their own, this, about to go away to college appointment, or if they want the parents to be there and just sort of sit back and let the child take charge. What happens when you go away to colleges? The student is expected to speak for themselves, make appointments for themselves, handle everything college related themselves. The college doesn't necessarily want the parents real involved anymore at that point. So it's best if the child is comfortable with speaking for themselves, speaking up for themselves, advocating for themselves, all of those kind of things. So this appointment that you would have with your clinical team prior to going away to college might be a really great opportunity to start that process of advocating, speaking up for themselves, learning about the disease themselves, and all of that with the current clinical team. So that's something that we really suggest you think about. And then when you're going for that appointment, prepare any questions that you have for your clinical team, for your doctor, dietitian, whoever, in advance. Take the time, sit down, come up with the questions. You and your child can do this together, come up with the questions together, and then maybe the student, the future college student, goes to the appointment themselves, or like I said, the parent goes too, but they sort of are in the background, just there as moral support while they're figuring this all out. Some of the potential questions that you may want to ask your team, depending on how long it's been since you were diagnosed, you might even want to ask them for a little refresher about celiac disease. Again, we have in our minds that this future college student has been always handling all these things with a parent involved. And so now they're going to step out on their own. And so do they need a little refresher conversation about celiac disease? Things like, how do you handle gluten exposure if it should happen? They want to know how the diagnosis was made. Did they have a blood test? Did they have an endoscopy? Did they have both? Things like that that they may want to know in case somebody is asking them those kind of questions when they get to school. And of course, can or should my parents stay involved? I think your clinical team is the best one to know you and your situation individually and can answer this the best. But again, it's really important to keep in mind that generally a college is only going to talk to the student. At that point in time, they really treat them like adults. They want them to have the answers, know the things. And so generally speaking, they don't include parents a whole lot at that level. And then again, talk to your clinical team about, should you get another team at school or continue just with your current clinical team? That's something that would be very individual as well. Your doctor is going to know you best, how you handle things, if you have regular issues, if you have additional issues along with celiac disease, things like that, that may determine if you want to have a clinical team there at the college. in that town as well. And then you also want to talk about vitamins and supplements and things like that before you head off to school. Have those levels tested, do all of those things so that if you need any supplementation in the form of vitamins and those kind of things, that can be worked out before you leave. And then just general tips on navigating celiac disease in college. Your clinical team generally would be helpful with those kind of things because they've sent lots of their patients off to college before and they hear lots of feedback and things like that. So they can definitely give some tips and things like that. And then as far as the path to getting accommodations, setting up accommodations, the first thing you want to do is you want to make sure you have a celiac diagnosis letter. So you would ask your clinical team for a diagnosis letter that would include the accommodations that you believe that you need. So generally speaking, a clinical team has a sort of a standard template type letter where they can then go in and kind of customize sections related to what accommodations you need based on the life that you live with celiac, the college that you're going to, different things like that, that all would be sort of custom to your situation. And then you want to inform the university, which would be started by sending that diagnosis letter to the Office of Disability. They all have a little bit different names. Generally speaking, it's along the lines of Office of Disability, Disability Services Office, something along those lines. But that's kind of how you get the whole ball rolling, is by reaching out to them. And generally the first thing that they want is that diagnosis letter that you've got from your clinical team. And then the next thing that you want to do is meet with the Office of Disability. You actually want to go in and have a meeting with them and have kind of a list of the accommodations that you're requesting. You did put them in, the clinical team did put them in that diagnosis letter, but you also want to have them in your hand and you want to be able to talk through that with them and make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page and they understand what you're looking for. And then from there, they'll create the college student and the Office of Disability creates the plan, and they work together, like I said, with the Office of Disability. And you really want to make sure you're advocating for yourself. Again, this comes back to, as a future college student, existing college student, you want to make sure that you are advocating for yourself. One of the things about celiac disease, and if you've had the disease for any number of years, it's a constantly, you're just constantly advocating for yourself. You go to a restaurant, you've got to talk through everything there. It's what you do. You have to do that with the Office of Disability as well. So you tell them what you need, they talk through it, they help you, they write the plan. If the plan isn't quite what you need, advocate for yourself, tell them what else you need to be included in it. So really you're speaking up for yourself. And again, at the college level, they mostly want to hear from the student, not the parent. And then you implement the plan. So you use the accommodations to make sure you get safe food and whatever is in those accommodations at the college level. Typically, it really revolves a lot around food, less about other things, which is a little bit different than, the sort of K through 12, where we have some other things in there, but a lot of it really revolves around food at the college level. And then you would meet to update that set of accommodations. So you want to request to meet annually or more often if there's issues. It's a combination of things. One is to make changes to the accommodations if you find that changes need to be made. If you forgot something, if you don't need something, if whatever the case may be. But also, it's a way to almost remind them that you're there and that you need their help if you're seeing them every year. And as an example, somebody else that I helped recently with college accommodations, they had already been in college for a year. They were having some issues. And what happened was the student was supposed to meet with the dietitian every year, and the student just simply forgot that that was part of how the accommodations were supposed to work. Once I dug in, talked to them, they said, oh, part of what was set up was that the student would meet with the dietitian the beginning of every year, go over everything, find out what the changes are, update our records, all of those kind of things. Student didn't remember. And so they weren't getting the accommodations that they needed to be getting. So once we worked that out, the student went, met with the dietitian, everything got worked out. So always check in with everybody every year when the year starts. That's the best way to handle that. And then what do we mean by advocate for yourself? As we've talked about a little bit already, you want to meet with your academic advisor proactively to discuss your needs outside of food. So if you have, if you're somebody who maybe deals with some of the neurological issues related to celiac disease, maybe you deal with some brain fog, maybe you have headaches, maybe you have whatever the case may be that actually affects you in the classroom, that's something that you want to talk to your advisor about so that the advisor knows that you've got some needs in that area. And then in addition to the advisor, then you want to make sure that your professors all know about those things as well, and they can help make sure that things are in place so that it's not affecting your schoolwork and your grades and things like that. And then of course you want to communicate with the food service regarding how they're going to safely feed you. So the Office of Disability should connect you with that department. That's typically how it works. If they don't just offer, when you talk to the Office of Disability, you want to make sure you say to them, who's my contact in the food service department, so that I can reach out to them and connect with them and ask them questions. So those are the kind of things that you're going to want to do to advocate. And then as far as reasonable accommodations, here's kind of a list of things, and some things apply to some people and some things don't apply to some people. And you sort of just take the list and come up with what matches your needs. Again, it's, celiac disease isn't the same for everybody. Everybody has different needs. So basically, we're just going to sort of breeze through some of these things, but assigning staff to assist with orienting a student with celiac disease to gluten-free food options, meaning somebody who knows about gluten-free maybe takes you to the dining hall and shows you around and tells you where to find things and shows you how things are labeled and shows you a dedicated gluten-free section or shows you where you can get your gluten-free snacks or whatever the case is. Every college is different. So they all do the dining services a little bit different, but that's exactly why you would like to have somebody sort of take you around and show you how all of that works. I think that's a really good accommodation for everybody, no matter what. That's a nice accommodation. And then adopt standard practices to prepare gluten-free food that's free of cross contact. This is an accommodation we're asking of the dining staff to put in standard practices so that they're doing things to avoid cross contact and those kind of issues. If gluten-free food is not available, provide access to housing with a fully equipped kitchen. So there's probably a small handful of colleges and universities these days that don't offer gluten-free. It would be a very small handful. And if that's the case, then you would ask them to provide some sort of housing that has a kitchen so you can cook for yourself safely. Provide gluten-free foods prepared free of cross contact in a dining hall that meets the same nutritional standards as offered to other students. That's the catch here. And that we'll get into a little bit later when we sort of have an open conversation. It's one of the things we're going to talk about a little bit. But the biggest part of this is you need to have nutritionally rounded, well-balanced food, even though you're gluten-free. So again, we'll get into that a little bit more later, but that's a point that's important. And that the food service team and the staff are all trained on gluten-free food preparation, obviously. Provide a refrigerator and microwave in dorm room that's used only by the student with celiac disease to prevent cross contact. That's a reasonable accommodation. We're going to get into that a little bit more again when we chat kind of openly, but sometimes that doesn't always happen. So we'll talk about that. Allow students with celiac disease to pre-order gluten-free meals. So a lot of colleges and universities will post their menus, and you can sort of go into an app and you can click that you're gluten-free. It'll show you only the gluten-free things, and you can order your meals in advance. And that's actually very helpful, very handy. We like it when that happens. Kids these days don't necessarily like to go face-to-face and talk to people and request their gluten-free meal. And the other side of that is sometimes it can be complicated if now you only have this small window of time to eat and you're waiting for them to bring you your food, prepare your food because you had to ask in the dining hall. So these places that have the apps and things like that where you can order the food in advance, very helpful. But they don't all offer that. Typically, it's the bigger universities that offer that. And then let's see, prepare a dedicated space in the main dining hall to store and prepare gluten-free foods. Typically, if they offer gluten-free foods, there is a dedicated space that they do that, but it is a question to ask to make sure of how they're handling that. And unrestricted access to bathrooms is needed. I think typically at the college level, there's very few questions about, nobody's raising their hand and asking to go to the restroom, things like that at the college level are kind of done. So generally speaking, having that unrestricted access is kind of it is what it is. But what's nice is to make sure that your professor knows, and that's where we talked about the self-advocating, make sure a professor knows that you may have to do that. So in advance, when you're letting them know some of your needs included in that, you may want to just say, due to having celiac disease, I may have to step out of the room to use the restroom, and then I will come back in. Just always explaining in advance so that there's never a question. That's always my advice. Label foods to easily identify gluten and other common allergens. Generally speaking, if there's gluten-free foods offered, they typically are labeled. Again, on the app that a lot of these universities have, you actually click your dietary needs and it only shows you gluten-free options when you choose the gluten-free. Use vendors that accept students' prepaid meal cards for gluten-free foods. So this is when you have a dining hall where they've got individual vendors. So you might end up with going to a university where there's, let's say, I don't know, for example, a Chick-fil-A. It's right there on campus. It's run basically by the college. And so what we want to make sure is that they accept the prepaid meal cards so that you can get your gluten-free waffle fries there and your grilled chicken nuggets. Chick-fil-A is good at gluten-free. Anyhow, so there's that. And then work with a student to develop accommodations to fully include and all learning activities without gluten exposure. So if you happen to have a class where maybe there's some sort of an experiment or something happening, some chemistry or something that involves gluten, you want to make sure that there's some accommodation made so that you can participate in it in some form or another. And yeah, so those are some of the reasonable accommodations. And then some of the questions to ask a dining hall. What precautions do you take to ensure safety of gluten-free meal? Do the kitchens have a dedicated section for gluten-free food? Do any of the dining halls have a gluten-free section? Do you use symbols to indicate that dishes are gluten-free or can be made gluten-free? Does my meal plan allow me to access food outside of the dining hall? Do other students on campus eat gluten-free? Do you have an ordering system like an app or website like we talked about for students with special dietary needs? Are you able to share with students the ingredient lists of meals? Some of those apps actually will show, in addition to what's being served, it'll give a list of all the ingredients in those meals as well. The apps are really typically very helpful. Is the staff trained to prevent cross contact? Are they knowledgeable about ingredients and labels? Are there any grab and go options on campus that are gluten-free? That's a really good list of things to run by the dining hall staff when you do meet them. You may have other questions in addition to this, but that's a really good list there. So now we're going to move more into the dorm and campus life. And some of these things we're going to touch on more when we do sort of our open conversation as well. But what I would say as far as roommates go, you want to make sure you have open communication, that they know you have celiac disease, that you talk to them about how it affects you, how serious it is, how careful they need to be. And then obviously just the normal life things in addition, discuss, when you study, how you study, when you sleep, how you sleep, who's cleaning, who's not cleaning, social habits, all of those kind of things that are just life when you're sharing a room with at least one other person. Nowadays, dorm rooms are oftentimes shared by 4 people. And then roommate does not have to eat gluten-free. So I think it's really important for us to say, just because you share a room with somebody else doesn't mean that somebody else has to eat gluten-free. It's, really generally speaking, dorm rooms are split right down the middle. The roommate stuff is here, your stuff is here. You have your little refrigerator here, they have a little refrigerator there. It's very easy to keep things safe and clean. You have your own desk, which turns out to be where you sit to eat. They have their own desk. It's so sharing a space where one is gluten-free and one is not, that's always fine. We would never tell you you need to room with somebody who's gluten-free as well. And then as far as dorms, again, there's as I said, we're going to come back to this when we start chatting a bit, but dedicated mini fridge and microwave is ideal. That's great. We love that. There's also the possibility of a shared communal cooking space. Sometimes each floor has their own little kitchenette, that kind of a thing, which allows you to cook a little bit more than just a microwave. Some of the things that can be made in a microwave, and again, we're going to dive into this a little bit deeper, but there's a brand called Kevin's Meals, frozen veggies that are in the bags. You just can put the bag in the microwave, microwavable rice, microwavable macaroni and cheese. There's a lot. So we'll talk some more about that. And then as far as dining halls go, how to handle issues, potentially a lack of variety. That's one of the big complaints that I hear from people with celiac, is there's a bit of a lack of variety in the dining hall. Oftentimes they want to combine all the allergens into one station, meaning that everybody who has any type of allergen or intolerance is now removing all of them from their diet. So a lot of times at colleges, we find like a top 9 allergen-free station. So now somebody who has celiac can't eat gluten, but now we've also taken away, dairy and just a list of things from their diet, and that can be a little bit complicated. Oftentimes you just don't like the things that they serve, and that's an issue. Or they don't serve all 3 meals in a day. That's an issue. So there's definitely some things that we'll get into a little bit further once we start talking more. And then off-campus life, social events. So same as at home, nothing changes. You want to plan ahead. You want to ask questions, bring your own food, snacks, whatever. Eat before you go. All the same kind of things that you consider just when you're going out at the high school level with your friends or whatever. So nothing really changes there. You're just on your own doing this. Restaurants and takeout food, again, handle the same as you always have. Nothing really changes. You're going to ask all the same questions. You're going to, all of that remains the same as it did when you were living at home. I strongly suggest the Find Me Gluten Free app. It's very helpful. If you haven't already downloaded it, I would definitely suggest you download it before you head off to college. It tells you a lot about restaurants, other people's experiences at restaurants, and you can search by the area that you're in. You can search by the type of food that you're hungry for, things like that. So it's a really good app. And then, of course, always call ahead with questions. Same thing as we do now. Nothing changes. Ask questions when you get there. Again, it's always advocating for yourself, asking the questions. Nothing changes about any of that just because you went to college. So you just want to continue all those practices as you've been doing them for, however long. And then, again, with the off-campus life housing, now we're talking maybe you're in an apartment and you have roommates in an apartment. Handle it the same as in a dorm. Nothing changes. Everybody can still share the space. You can have gluten eaters and gluten-free eaters. You just have to take all the normal precautions. So basically that means you're going to have a designated area. You're going to have a prep space that's strictly for gluten-free. You're going to have gluten-free in the top shelves of, cabinets and storage and all of that. Some pots and pans you're going to want your own of. Not all of them. Lots of them are fine to share. But the colanders and I don't know any single college student who has a cast iron pan, but don't share it if you do. Have your own toaster, all the things that you already know and are probably already doing in your home kitchen. You're just going to do that, when you're out on your own in an apartment. And then cleaning the kitchen, um, clean it regularly, wipe things down, make sure that you're, wet towel. You literally want to physically remove gluten. You can't disinfect it away. You can't burn it away. You can't do any of those things. You have to physically remove it. So we would suggest if you're in a shared kitchen, just make sure that you're cleaning it regularly. Make sure that your prep space is always wiped down before you use it. And the other thing, as sort of a side note, perhaps you and your roommates consider only baking gluten-free baked goods. If you're into baking and if you're into eating baked goods, you don't have to do that. But sometimes what I find is that if your roommates are baking things that contain gluten, it can be hard to resist. It can be hard to resist those baked goods that contain gluten. So what I find is most people are perfectly happy with gluten-free baked goods and don't mind eating those. So if your roommates are like that and they're good with eating your gluten-free baked goods that you're actually making yourself in your apartment, that might be the best way to go. But again, it's not hurting anything in the kitchen space, the shared space, whatever, for them to make gluten-free baked goods as long as everything is being cleaned up. But just for your own temptation reasons, it might be nice if everybody's doing gluten-free baked goods. Okay, so now we're gonna move on to our discussion, and I'm just gonna stop sharing there. And okay, so the original plan was for us to have some college students on talking through things with us. And due to the fact that they're in college and life changes quickly, we don't have them. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover some things. I'll give you a little history about me. I not only do this job, but also I have celiac disease. I was diagnosed 18 years ago. I have a daughter who's a sophomore in college who has celiac disease. So I can speak to all of this. And so that's basically what we're going to do. So we're going to just kind of have a little bit of a conversation here.
Yeah,
Yeah, and Rachel's going to chat with us as well. And we're going to,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yes. So, Lindsay, awesome. Thank you. And Audrey, I know you're on camera as well, and you can jump in. I think you gave so much information. Please know that these programs are recorded. We absolutely will be posting this, Lindsay, am I right, to our
Yeah.
YouTube channel,
Yeah.
which is a great resource if you want to watch back anything. And I know, Lindsay, you gave great questions and everything. And I just, as a mom who has a freshman in college, I just want to note like the disability office, they're amazing. And a lot of times they do those intake meetings. And one thing Lindsay knows I was so excited about, my daughter happens to go to a university in the Southeast. And Lindsay knows I was so excited. They had, our Facebook groups as parents of incoming freshmen. They had an actual within the university, the dietitian runs a Facebook group of families with food allergies and disabilities of University of blank. So I'm just saying there are also great ways where you get some communication. And as Lindsay said, and Dr. Verma, I'm putting in my Dr. Verma hat because she's not with us tonight. You should never determine where you go to school based on all of you can make anything work for your child. Let it be about the school they want to go to, what they're interested in studying. Maybe it's the, place in the country. And I love one of our people in the chat has been giving fantastic advice of just his own current student. I've loved these anecdotes you've been giving parents throughout. So jump in and chime in. We want this to be interactive. Again, please utilize the Q&A, but I'm going to jump in with Lindsay. We had some submitted questions, and I just wanted to start here. Lindsay, I know this applies to you as well. My son was accepted to a university a few hours away from home. They're very excited for him, but worried on what he'll eat. Dorm fridges aren't too big, and the worry of cross-contamination from his roommate in the cafeteria. How do you handle that?
So, yeah, so we did touch on the cross-contamination from the roommate in the dorm. I really, in my experience, don't find that to be much of a concern because, again, you're going to keep things separate. So you'll have your own mini fridge, they'll have their own mini fridge, assuming there's two. Again, dorm rooms do go up to 4, I think, these days. But assuming there's 2, they'll be separated. Food will be separated out, and then they have their own desks. So most of the time, if they're eating in the room, they're either sitting on their own bed or they're sitting at their desk. And so I think the potential for cross contact in a dorm room is very minimal. That so from there, then the cafeterias in the college level, they're called dining halls, but there's always the risk of cross contact, no matter what. Restaurants, dining halls, cafeterias, there's always a risk. So every time that we eat, as somebody with celiac disease, we outside of our own homes, there's a risk. That being said, as we run over in some of those, questions asked the dining hall, those kind of things, I think that generally speaking, the majority of dining halls have really good policies and procedures in place. So they're doing a lot of things to help ensure that the cross contact isn't happening. So much like you would do at home, they have a separate area where they're preparing gluten-free meals, separate station perhaps where the whole thing is done at that station. The food is stored, the food is cooked, the food is served. Oftentimes that happens. That really cuts down on the potential for cross contact. So again, every college is set up a little bit differently in how the dining hall works, but no matter how it's set up, if they're doing a gluten-free program, chances are they have policies in place to make sure cross contact isn't happening. So it'll be an individual thing. Once you find the college, once you go and you talk to the dining hall, they'll be able to tell you all those policies that they have in place to help make sure that your child stays safe.
That's great. Thank you. And I know someone in the chat earlier had a question. Um, are the apps that these schools utilize, and I know those specifically as they're outlined, I know one is called Order Ally. I think it depends on the school. Am I correct?
It
And
does, yeah.
again, we just want to reiterate the utilization of this, and I'm pulling this from my own daughter's website. It's an ingredient list. They can place mobile orders, like Lindsay said, choose from a list of allergen-friendly swaps, and send text directly to head chefs. And so I think that dietitians are key in the school, meeting with the kids. And I think when you're doing tours, one thing is to carve out time, even after the formal tour. Definitely request in the admissions office, or you yourself could go and check out. Please try to meet with food services. I think as a parent and a child, it makes you feel good when your feet are on the ground. You can obviously do that via Zoom if your child is going somewhere far. But I do think that incorporating that when you're going for a formal visit is a really good thing. Lindsay, can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned before you were going to get further into detail. I know that we're pivoting a little. We're really good at that. But how, you know, first, I know you work with kids all the time who are in college. Is there living off campus? When does that typically happen for the college kids? Like, is that again school dependent, or how do you navigate that if your child after freshman year, I believe most students
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
have to stay on campus?
Typically freshman year, you have to be on campus. Now, if the school is, if they're saying we don't really have gluten-free offerings, we can't accommodate very well, then even freshman year, you might say, okay, so the accommodation that we need is a place for this student to live so that they can cook for themselves. That doesn't happen very often, but it can.
Mhm.
So generally speaking, first year, freshman year is in the dorms on the campus. After freshman year, the vast majority of colleges and universities do allow you to move off campus. A lot of times, I'd say in all the college students I've worked with, no less than 95% of them do choose to move off campus and have their own kitchen after that freshman year. So sophomore, junior, senior year, typically they're in their
Mhm.
own apartment, feeding themselves either fully or the majority. They may do a small meal plan, um, but not the standard full meal plan
Mhm.
generally.
That's great. And I see a lot of there's a little bit of chatter about studying abroad. And I think, again, it is very school dependent what programs are applicable. I will say, just from travel and what we know,
Mhm.
Europe and many other countries are far friendlier than the United States with gluten-free practices. And Lindsay, I would love, and Audrey, if you have anything to add to that, but I know Lindsay, you definitely worked with kids.
Yeah, yeah. So myself, I have traveled abroad a decent amount with myself and my daughter and my whole family. And then I work with kids who travel quite a bit. And I would say that pretty much anywhere I've traveled to, I've really not had any issue. Even with language differences and things like that, there's cards that you can get that give sort of you can get Spanish speaking cards that talk about gluten free and what you need, and you can just sort of present it to them if there is a language issue there. And in every language, I'm just using that as an example, Spanish. So Italy's amazing. I was there almost 2 years ago, and my daughter and I could eat so many things that she had never had before. She was diagnosed when she was 4. So many things that she'd never experienced before she was able to experience there. Um, and so, yes, it's very easy to travel outside of the United States with celiac disease, and in a lot of ways, easier than right here in the United States. There's some stricter guidelines and things like that in a lot of other countries. Um, Different people overseeing claims and things like that. That is a little bit different and probably a little bit better than the United States in a lot of those countries.
Yeah, and I'll echo that too, Lindsay. Hi, everyone. But definitely worth studying abroad. I
Yeah,
mean, to just affirm everything that Lindsay has been saying, don't let celiac hold you back
right.
because at the end of the day, you're the one who knows it's all about logistics. Where is the gluten going? Is it here? Is it not? I mean, and these are all things that we can help you figure out when you're at the college level. But if you want to go study abroad, there are some places that are obviously easier to do than others, right? I've actually also heard good things about Austria. I don't know if other people have had similar experiences, but Austria, Spain, Italy, of all places, it's like the carb heaven of the universe, the known universe. So yeah, definitely. I mean, study abroad,
Me
please,
abroad.
and
Yeah,
study where you want to,
yeah.
and we'll help you along the way.
Yeah, yeah, your clinical team can definitely help with that. There, you can do a lot of research online. There's some really well-known people who have celiac disease that travel, that you can go, you can find their blogs, you can find their Instagram, you can find all of those things, and they have wonderful guides that tell you where they went, where they ate, all of that kind of stuff. So the information is out there. So definitely, if studying abroad is important to you, do it and you'll figure it out.
I was gonna say too, I mean, if you're on Instagram, the wealth of knowledge that people with celiac disease post on Instagram for traveling, I mean, and while you're on there, be sure to follow the University of Chicago Instagram
Mhm.
page and check for our new posts because they're awesome. But another good one is gluten-free Globetrotter. That she's actually a traveling celiac that we have a personal connection with. We recommend her blog. Instagrams, and reach out if you have any other specific questions.
So we have a great question in the chat. I want to shift gears because um, the bottom line is sometimes cross contact happens and children can feel unsafe on campus, with their food choices, but that could lead to social isolation. And as we know, especially in college, it's a very social part of the day. Lindsay, how would you say navigating that, especially that first year as you're immersing yourself on campus?
Uh-huh.
How do you balance the two?
So I think that my first thought on this is, are they actually have they had bad experiences in the dining hall that have led them to this level of concern and potentially fear and then isolation? So if they're actually having experiences in the dining hall where they believe they're getting sick, I would start by doing a little bit of investigating on what's happening there, while also, and this is one of the things that I really want to talk about because I think it's really important, and my daughter went through this, while also knowing how to feed yourself in your dorm room to supplement. So I think if you can figure out how to do that and you're not totally reliant on the dining hall where you might be getting sick, then you can not have as much social anxiety. So, oh, I can feed myself in the dining hall, or I mean, I can feed myself in the dorm. I know I can do that. I know I can eat healthy this way. And so I can do that before I go out and do anything else. I know I can feed myself and then I can do the social things and not worry about needing to eat while I'm out. So that's kind of my thought process, is sort of have those things lined up to help deal with a lacking dining hall. Continue to be social, just don't do it with food. Eat before you go, take your own food, whatever. Um, and then work on coming up with maybe some plan with the dining hall. I think that there needs to be a meeting with food service to say, here's what's happening. I'm getting sick. This is the only food I've been eating. So there's some connection here. And then they should help you sort of deep dive into what might be going wrong. What is it that maybe is getting contaminated, or is there some ingredient that they're using that they believe is gluten-free and it's not, or whatever. It's not unusual to have to do a little bit of digging to see what might be the cause. And the truth is, always keep in mind, just because you have, the typical celiac issues, diarrhea, constipation, whatever, doesn't mean it's actually celiac. There could be something else wrong. So keep that in mind as well. Maybe it involves an appointment with your clinical team to double check and make sure something else isn't going on, that just looks like your normal celiac symptoms.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I want to just note on this. I hope I didn't give the impression that it is, that your child's going to get gluten. I really believe, and we've been helping a lot of, Lindsay talks about your clinical team. I can honestly say here at University of Chicago, we strive to really be here along the way with your kids. And we have people like Lindsay and Audrey and Dr. Verma and myself. And obviously, if there are other gastroenterologists as well on the team and dietitians, but who really try to complement, your child's care while even away at school. But I don't want to be flip at all. I don't believe these schools have any intention. I think that they really will work with you. And I think they really do strive to, no one's perfect at all. And I'm not saying your child's going to get gluten at all. I think it is doing, like everything about celiac disease, it's doing the preparation at a time. And I want to kind of go into, Lindsay, you talk about feeding yourself in the dorm room. And you mentioned briefly in your presentation, I know you noted we were going to get back into that, but maybe we could talk a little bit
Yeah.
about supplemental foods that are shelf stable or good for that small fridge and microwave.
Yeah, so just a little bit of background, and I'm going to speak to my experience as the parent of a freshman in college who was living in the dorm and who did have a meal plan through the dining hall. And I'm going to start this by saying the dining hall did provide gluten-free food. What we found, and I briefly mentioned in my presentation, for my daughter, we found that the main source of protein they were providing was fish, because they were trying to combine gluten-free meals and vegetarian meals. Yeah. And she's not a fish eater. So that was our first obstacle. Anyhow, so it kind of goes back to when I mentioned sometimes they like to combine different allergies, intolerances, special dietary needs, whatever the case is, they sometimes like to combine those. So for my daughter, it was a bit of a challenge because she is not a fish eater, and that was really showing up pretty regularly because they were trying to combine some special dietary needs into one offering. So that caused us to need to think a little bit outside of the box and figure out how can we supplement, on the meals every week, however many there were that were fish, what can we do to make sure that she's still eating? Because what I find is a lot of college students will just sit quietly and not tell anybody. So that she wasn't super comfortable going to the school, to the food service staff and talking to them about it. So I said, fine, let's figure it out. We'll supplement. So what we came up with and what I mentioned previously is something called Kevin's Meals. I'm gonna share my screen and show you what the labels look like, what the boxes look like, because I think they're so helpful. Anyhow, can you see them? These are Kevin's Meals. They're found in a lot of different stores. They don't necessarily have these many options in every store, but like Aldi, Target sometimes has some, regular grocery stores have them. Anyhow, these were phenomenally helpful for us. This is chicken. It's all, here's beef. It was a great source of protein for my daughter. She would get, I think she got like 3 meals out of them. They're like $9. And they stay in their fridge. They're all kind of vacuum sealed in there. And then along with it, she would get a bag of frozen vegetables. And she could keep that in the little freezer that's at the top of the mini fridge. And then she would also get like microwavable rice. So she would have a full, totally well-rounded meal that she could completely make in the microwave. And like I said, one of these would last her, 2 or 3 meals. So she'd eat it, several times that week. So that was a good one. The other thing you can do in the microwave is a baked potato. So if you prefer baked potato over rice, you can do that. You can do macaroni and cheese. You can get the little cups of macaroni and cheese. The number of things that are available that you can put in the microwave these days that are still healthy. You just have to sort of change your mind in the way you think about the way you cook a little bit and look for a little bit of already prepared things like this. These are actually nice because they don't have a lot of junky ingredients in them. They're pretty minimal on the ingredients and not a lot of junk.
And I would encourage you when you're doing college visits and talking to the food services, ask them for a sample weekly menu from the current one so that your child can kind of look, or ask if you can eat a meal on campus while you're there. A lot of times they will absolutely allow that, especially if you're in that. And I love Tim's comment. Kids late night eating and, after they've been going out or whatever, they love to DoorDash. Have your student DoorDash their food alone, separately from a place that they trust so that the order can't get, mixed in. I think that there are safe gluten-free. It might be a pizza place. And it is a lot of like figuring out that city or the college town you're in. And, but I think it's what I like to say about, when you're managing celiac disease, you do a little bit more legwork, even right now, living at home and you're in high school, but you can do it really successfully. So that means, eating on campus. It could be eating off campus. cooking in your dorm room. I think it does take a little extra work, but I think your kids can be safe and happy and hopefully, acclimate. Being a freshman in college and just being away in general, it's a big adjustment. It's a lot of things happening all at once. So I just want to note that you can do it successfully. And as Tim said it really well, it takes some adjustment and give your child and you grace. And I know Lindsay has noted quite a few times, it's learning to find their own voice and advocate for themselves. And they will, it may not, it takes time. It just takes time. So, Lindsay, are there other things you wanted to cover? I know we're getting close to time.
No, I think that that's it. I do see there's a comment here at the end of the chat about universities crediting your account. Uh, In my situation, we didn't even ask. We just dealt with it ourselves and we moved on with life. I don't know if that's the best answer or not, but it just was what felt the easiest to us was let's just fix this ourselves and move on. She did eat some things in the dining hall. It wasn't that she couldn't eat anything. There were a number of days each week where they weren't offering something she liked. And that's the catch. I'm not certain that they would have given any sort of credit, discount, whatever, because they did their job. They offered her gluten-free food. It just wasn't to her liking. She just isn't a fish eater. There were a couple other hiccups along the way, but that was the big one. And so in their eyes, I'm sure they say, well, we did offer the gluten-free food. I'm sorry you didn't eat it. They wouldn't necessarily feel that they owe us a refund for that, I'm sure.
And I believe that with most universities, you can adjust your meal plans mids for the next semester. Some schools, again, everything is school contingent. It doesn't mean there are not loopholes. And there are just a number of, I really believe, whether it's big universities, private schools, mid-sized schools, there are wonderful schools who are really trying. And I think you just have to partner with them to meet the needs of these kids for sure. But Lindsay, do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap up for tonight?
No, I think that's it.
Well, I appreciate the chat was awesome tonight, and I feel like gave some really thoughtful advice, and I just appreciate everyone's time. It's a really exciting time. College is awesome. So fun, and there's just work to be done as a family. And I think have these experiences, college visits and conversations, whether they're Zooms or in person, when you're meeting with disability offices and dining services together, and let them lead the way, but you are there to kind of support them. But I wish all of your kids the best, and we will definitely be in touch with always more information and tips, but we thank you for joining tonight.